Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Health Podcast Show, the place to be to get the insights of leaders working at the intersection of health, science, and media. I'm your host, Dan Kendall, and this episode features a recording from the 2025 Health Podcast Summit, which was held on October 1st and 2nd. In total, we interviewed 42 speakers in 37 sessions that span topics across health, science, policy, and podcasting. You can wait to get access to all the sessions as we publish them here on your favorite platform, or you can get access to all the recordings, links, and resources by visiting our website at healthpodcast.org. Again, that's healthpodcast.org. Enjoy the show. Welcome to this session of Health Podcast Summit 2025. I'm your host, Dan Kendall, and our next session is with Chris Kohler. Chris is the Vice President of Publications at the American Diabetes Association, and he oversees content that reaches 13 million unique visitors annually. He manages 4 peer-reviewed journals and a growing portfolio of podcasts for health professionals and patients in the diabetes space. In this session, Chris shares how a conversation about reaching time-pressed primary care physicians sparked ADA's podcast strategy way back in 2013. That single podcast has expanded to include a total of 4 separate podcast shows, all published by the American Diabetes Association, and they have even more planned in 2026 and beyond. He explains how monetizing the attention of their podcast audiences helps diversify revenue, and how humanizing research through author conversations creates engagement that traditional publishing simply cannot achieve. I'd like to take a moment to thank all our sponsors and partners who make Health Podcast Summit 2025 possible. A special thanks to our gold sponsor, BetterHelp, and to our silver sponsor, ZS. Please visit healthpodcastsummit.com for links to all these organizations and special offers. Let's dive into this conversation with Chris Kohler of the American Diabetes Association. Chris, thank you so much for joining me at Health Podcast Summit. How are you?
Doing well. It's good to see you, Dan.
Chris, I want to start off with talking about your role there at ADA. You're responsible for all the publishing that ADA does, and there's a lot. I'm a member of ADA. I go to your scientific sessions each year.
Yeah.
I receive some of it as a member. There's a lot of material that you push out the door. So before we go into the audio component of how that fits into the sort of omni-channel strategy of what you're doing, can you take the audience through a little bit about what your reach is in terms of publishing and digital and print and audio and the whole gamut?
Sure, absolutely. So our publishing program consists of kind of our foundational scholarly journal publications. So we have 4 journals, all peer-reviewed, and they kind of run the spectrum of professional diabetes management, from research to bedside to the block. So we have our flagship journal, which is a biomedical research, a lot of lab-based research, aptly titled Diabetes, a very clever name, that's looking at the pathophysiology and physiological mechanisms behind diabetes and related complications. A lot of that research translates over into clinical research, for which we have Diabetes Care, which is our most successful journal in terms of impact and usage and in audience and reach. A lot of the research in clinical diabetes then goes on to influence practical primary care applications. We have a journal, Clinical Diabetes, that publishes that type of content. And likewise, we have a journal called Diabetes Spectrum, which is geared toward diabetes education and strategies for self-management. The bedrock of everything that we publish at the American Diabetes is our standards of medical care in diabetes. These are evidence-based clinical practice recommendations that are published as a separate publication once a year, but are continuously published throughout the year as a quote unquote living document online. And we have mechanisms to make sure our audience and our constituents are aware of those updates. We also have a robust professional books program. The core series is our medical management series, which covers everything from obviously management of type 1 and type 2 diabetes, but nursing strategies, nutrition therapy information, lifestyle-based information, and the whole gamut. Custom publishing is big at the American Diabetes Association, trying to reach our constituents where they are with the information they need. And then, of course, about 10, 12 years ago, we started our podcast portfolio, which is a part of that strategy as well. And I could go on and on and on about some of the other items that we publish, but that's really kind of the core of our publishing program.
And I imagine also within that, you've got your newsletter outreach. Is that also
We have
within your
newsletter
responsibility?
outreach, consumer publications, a lot of information related to nutrition, and we're continuing to explore different formats and forms of outreach for both a patient-oriented audience and a professional-oriented audience.
So I don't have all the numbers memorized, but I know you serve both type 1 and type 2
That's
diabetes.
correct.
And I think it's almost 40 million people in America have type 2 diabetes and about 100 million with pre-diabetes, which also is something that I imagine you talk about. You also have the obesity work that you're working on in terms of reaching people who are living with obesity and dealing with that. And then you also have the type 1 population.
I want to say it's about 6 million type 1 in
Okay.
the US.
So millions of people affected by diabetes, living with various stages of autoimmune or type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. And can you give us some idea of the amount of outreach that you're doing through your publications? How many of these things are you actually printing? How many people come to your website? How many people on your newsletter? Again, whatever you're prepared to share.
So with our journals, we give an option for print or in online. Most of our users are accessing our content online, typically through institutional subscriptions. So subscriptions that their research library purchases or their institution university library purchases and accessing our content that way. We receive about 13 million unique visits a year to our journals platform. We've recently migrated our professional books over to that same platform, along with a monograph series that we launched about 3 years ago. So we're trying to make sure that we have all of our professional oriented content on that same platform. And again, yeah, about 13 million unique visitors and rising. So our next step for that platform is to implement kind of a AI data discovery tool to encourage users to continue accessing our site as opposed to another Google AI generated summary so that they can get to the core evidence, the versions of record that are influencing diabetes research and care.
And apologies to the audience if it feels like I'm dwelling a little bit too much on this, but I do want to paint a picture of the scope of what you're involved with. So the last two things I wanted to ask about before we dive into more of the podcasting strategy, but you also, I imagine, have a video component of what you're doing, and you also have the live event where I saw you last in Chicago,
Right.
where I imagine that doesn't fall directly under your remit, but can you give us an idea of what you're doing through your video strategy and through your live event, just so the audience has a little bit of an idea of all the different aspects, all the different touch points?
Yeah, ADA's Scientific and Healthcare Division produces several videos a year that are aligned with professional education. There's videos available from our scientific sessions that users can access. I don't know the exact reach or scope of the video program, but it is a robust part of ADA's overall strategy for reaching diabetes professionals and people living with diabetes. A lot of those video seminars and series are free to access. You can find many of them on YouTube and, of course, on the ADA platform. We do record some of our podcasts for video, like the live event that we had at ADA's recent scientific sessions in Chicago. Those events are just a blast. It's really one of the highlights of scientific sessions for me is seeing the hosts of all of our podcasts, all four of them, coming together and just kind of exuberantly geeking out on diabetes research and care.
Yeah.
And we're really lucky to have them on board. They do a fantastic job and they're just so utterly brilliant.
So diabetes is an old condition. The diabetes organization, the ADA, just had your 85th
Yeah.
anniversary. You've got all your periodicals, website, newsletter, videos, and then we've got the podcast component.
Yes.
So what was the move towards creating something in this audio format? What was the timing? What was the impetus for, and what were you trying to achieve when you decided to add that?
Yeah, we were strategizing ways to better reach primary care clinicians. And this was part of an editorial board meeting for our journal for primary care, which is clinical diabetes. And, the big challenge is, as everybody knows, healthcare professionals, primary care clinicians, general practitioners are very busy, seeing several patients a day in a compressed amount of time. So, how do we reach them with our information and with updates to ADA's evidence based standards of care while they're trying to juggle all of these professional and personal responsibilities? And so one of the editorial board members and I started discussing the potential of teaming up on a podcast after that meeting. And as it turns out, that editorial board member was Neil Skolnick, who is the longtime host of our flagship podcast, which is called Diabetes Core Update. We're getting ready to rebrand that to include diabetes, obesity, and cardiometabolic updates with the acronym DOC updates. That'll be happening in January 2026. That conversation spawned just an incredible collaboration and in relationship with Neil. It's been a journey. It was very much a startup project and still is in many ways a startup project because it's essentially me, Neil, and some marketing staff basically managing the program. But Diabetes Core Update, which is geared towards primary care professionals, eventually led to the launch of kind of its sister podcast, which is Diabetes Day by Day. And that podcast is intended for people living with diabetes and their caregivers. And then in the last 2 years, we've launched two others related to our journals. So there's Diabetes Care on Air, which is our podcast for highlighting content published in diabetes care, author interviews, highlights and updates related to diabetes related clinical research. And of course, Diabetes Bio, which is its companion podcast for our biomedical research journal, aptly titled Diabetes. So, yeah, it's been a fun ride. It's really become a core part of our outreach, in terms of serving the ADA mission to get the best, latest, most relevant information out to each podcast's respective audience. But on the journal side, too, on the publishing side, a way to highlight our authors and their research, our contributors, a way to humanize the research, and a way to better engage with our membership and constituents.
You've launched these four shows. You've given us an idea of the different markets and content for each of them. What's the response been like?
It's been great. So after having worked with Neil for over 12 years, but 12 years on the podcast, if you walk in the halls of ADA's premier annual meeting, the scientific sessions, people will recognize his voice when he's walking by and stop him and say, "You the diabetes core guy?" And he's like, "Yeah." And that'll start a whole conversation. It's really like walking around the halls with a minor niche diabetes related celebrity. So it's really cool. All of the anecdotal responses we received have been fantastic. And we do partner with other organizations to produce limited series based on certain topics for the diabetes healthcare community and research community, and they love it as well. So it's been a
Excellent.
very successful program.
You mentioned that you're actually thinking about, number one, rebranding. You mentioned that earlier. You're rebranding one of your existing podcasts, but you're also thinking about launching a fifth one. So this is obviously a strategy that seems to be working for you. So can you tell us about that fifth one and what you're trying to do, what problem you're trying to solve by adding that one into your library?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fifth one, it will be dedicated to ADA's professional membership. We're looking at ways to better engage with our members and to spotlight them, their career focus, their areas of expertise, what got them into the field. So first and foremost, a way to spotlight our members. And then secondly, a way to inform our members and the broader community of what's happening at ADA. So it'll be in collaboration with our science and healthcare division. It'll feature interviews not only with members and what they're doing, but folks at ADA who are spearheading different initiatives and programs to advance the care and management of diabetes and related conditions. So It's a way to keep our membership informed of what we're doing, how we can partner with them, and to invite them to be a part of our forms of outreach to really highlight what they're doing in their respective areas.
So how does this all work together? So you've got the audio component, you've got your website, you've got your journals. The journals are helping to feed in content that you can explore audibly with the authors and humanize them a bit more and tell some additional context that may not be referenced in the article or the publication itself. You've got your live events that you're creating content at, and you're also promoting your various podcasts. There's just as many people, as many thousands of people go to that scientific session event. There's just a lot of people who don't go there who might not even be aware of it. So you're also pushing this audio information out, which has a lower cost of distribution than
Mhm.
paper and people. So
Yeah,
tell
absolutely.
us how this sort of all works together to amplify the voice and serve your audience.
Yeah. So, topically, as I mentioned before, with the portfolio, we have that bench to bedside to block kind of model with what we're trying to do and the different types of content we're trying to accommodate. And then the formats of the podcast, the videos, custom publications that we put together, other educational initiatives, all kind of feed off of each other and amplify each other. So it's really kind of looking at educational strategies and informational strategies and the different tools of engagement for creating awareness around those strategies and that information across the spectrum of these different audiences and different components of diabetes research, care, clinical applications, education, and personal care. I don't want to throw out like the whole 360 view cliche, but that's essentially what it is. It's a part of a cycle for distributing and disseminating critical information for our respective audiences.
It sounds like you were pretty early in the curve as well, thinking about this 12 years ago. This was 2013. Podcasts had been around for almost 10 years at that point,
Yeah.
but it's still pretty early. I remember I started a podcast in 2016 and people said that was very early. So you
Right,
were
right.
way ahead of the curve, which kudos to you and your board member to have the vision to embrace this platform. How do you measure the ROI? Because it is 360. How do you measure the investment? And also, how do you budget for it? How does that sort of fit in as a line item, or is it a subset of other pieces? Are you sharing team members across various projects and then the podcast as a component?
Yeah. So for two podcasts, Diabetes Core Update and Diabetes Day by Day, they have separate line items. And we do monetize those podcasts. We will partner with other organizations, third parties, to create limited series and then get grant funding or sponsorship funding, and then to partner with them on marketing and distributing those series.
Okay.
So, Diabetes Core Update and Diabetes Day by Day have been monetized and they have been very successful from a publishing perspective. They have helped us fill gaps that have seen declines in traditional publishing, advertising, licensing and royalties, reprints, things of that nature. So the podcasts, in terms of a business strategy, have really helped us continue growing from a financial perspective. I should say with those sponsored series that all of the guardrails regarding any type of peer review professional program are there. In collaboration with Neil, is responsible for the editorial development, but we do obviously acknowledge the sponsors and their contributions and usually have a kickoff meeting to make sure that the outline that we've put together for the series is okay. And it almost always is. So for the other two, they are built into existing budget centers. So the cost for diabetes care on air is kind of weaved into the overall publication costs for Diabetes Care Journal. For Diabetes Bio, likewise, those costs are weaved into the overall marketing and publishing costs for Diabetes Journal. And we do not monetize those because they are affiliated with the journals.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I really want to encourage other associations and organizations to think about how they can do this, because one of the things I've said it a lot on these sessions here at the Health Podcast Summit, is you don't decide to make a podcast, you decide to add one. And
Right.
your experience with all the different things you're publishing, that certainly seems to be the case. You added a podcast, and that gave you the success and the impact to say, oh, we'll add another one. And now you're adding up to your fifth one in
Right.
2026. You did talk about monetization, which there's nothing wrong with monetizing that
Mhm.
attention as long as you do it with the guardrails and ethics
Yep.
and principles that you adhere to. There are ways to differentiate between editorial and advertising.
Yep.
And there's a way to do that in a way that serves your audience more effectively by putting information in front of them into their ears that they've actually elected to listen to. They've expressed an interest when they've clicked, they voted with their fingertip to hit your episode. And when you then
Exactly.
put a contextually relevant message in front of that,
Right.
that's really aligned with the interest that they've already expressed. And of course, they can always skip if they need to. But two questions around that. How are you actually monetizing that alongside other, or are you actually putting together like omni-channel campaigns, like some print or digital or direct mail or signage at your events along with the audio? Let's start with that.
Yeah, yes, all of the above. So a lot of times what we'll do is ADA will have a broader educational campaign and maybe a multi-year campaign, 2 or 3 years related to a particular topic, diabetes and chronic kidney disease or diabetes and eye health, in partnership and with the support from a grant from either a commercial entity or a non-commercial entity. And as part of those campaigns, we will build in a podcast series, sometimes a custom publication, along with other forms of live events, professional education initiatives, all kind of built on the foundation of our evidence based standards of care. So we will have campaigns that are built into a broader strategy that have other components, and then other times we will have campaigns that are just a 3 or 4 episode podcast mini series, which we call special editions. They're branded differently. They have all the transparency and disclosure elements that are aligned with good publication practices. And of course, they have those editorial guardrails that are so important to protect the integrity of the podcast and trust and confidence in the content that is being presented. Our podcasts have become a very sought after element of our third party sponsored educational campaigns. And like I said, they've really helped us kind of fill revenue gaps that are traditionally declining in the world of publishing in general.
I have some reasons why that might be, but what do you think, or what's the feedback about why you think that these are sought after instruments? So you've created this, you have all these other tools in your toolkit, you've got a membership. I pay to be a member of ADA. You've
Yeah,
got people who have opted in. Anybody can listen to any of the four of the podcasts that are available. There's no sign
great.
on required or membership, but that, as you said, is becoming very sought after. Why do you think that is?
I think just the form of engagement and the quickness of the speed and efficiency of getting relevant information out there. But I think aligning your brand as an educator with the brand of a component of ADA's form of outreach that is founded upon our evidence-based clinical practice recommendation. I think it checks a lot of boxes in terms of brand alignment, educational mission and initiatives, and speed and efficiency for reaching a particular audience. And just the form of getting that information is very refreshing when you're listening to 2 or 3 of the world's best clinical diabetes researchers, just having a very kind of organic, natural conversation and being able to put context behind the research is a way of acquiring information that is very difficult to achieve in traditional publishing models. I think that's a big
Yeah.
part of it too.
I'm sure there are going to be people who listen to this and are interested in finding out how they could participate. So, what is the sort of sales model or organization that you have set up? How does that sort of come into the organization if someone wants to see how they could engage across a variety of platforms, but also specifically around the podcast component?
Yeah, we have a per episode cost for partnering with a third party organization on a specific topical series. For the broader campaigns, those costs are usually kind of baked in to the cost of the broader campaign. So it would really depend on the other elements that are a part of that type of campaign. But yeah, our model is if it's just strictly a podcast focused form of outreach, we price it according to episode.
So you're not doing dynamic ads and things like that.
We do some paid advertising. We create a landing page that actually hosts the series and has the necessary disclosures and acknowledgments. It kind of serves as a marketing hub for print and digital advertising to promote the campaign. We provide the partner with embeddable links for the podcast. So if they want to reuse them in some capacity, either on their sites, their platforms, or other promotional or marketing materials, they have the license to do so. So and of course, social media, all the usual channels for promotion.
Got it.
Yeah.
And what can you tell us about the production process? Or I imagine it's hard to get all these different people in a room. So how are you managing that? Are you outsourcing some of that? Are your hosts familiar with the technology, both from the microphone as well as the software perspective?
Yeah. So it varies by the podcast. So the two that we produce with Dr. Skolnick, he is the host, editor, producer, production guy, and really, I mean, it's been an incredible relationship. He is a one-man walking podcast production studio. So we have an incredible relationship with him, and that's for Diabetes Core Update and Diabetes Day by Day. So having a relationship with somebody who understands the research and has the medical expertise, he is a primary care physician, and who can produce a podcast is really fantastic. So that's Diabetes Core Update and Diabetes Day by Day. For the two journal-specific podcasts, we partner with an agency, and they help us with coordinating the interviews and producing the podcast. And then our team actually uploads those podcasts and distributes them via our server.
So I have just a few closing questions for you, Chris. As other people are listening to this and they're trying to figure out how they fit this into their strategy, both associations as well as other members of the healthcare system and healthcare sector, what are some mistakes that you suggest that they try to avoid? Maybe mistakes that you've learned along the way. You've been doing this for a long time, so that things have changed a lot over the 12 years or so that you've been podcasting. But any key tips that you'd want to pass along to help people get ahead more quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, you mentioned like just not launching a podcast for the sake of podcasts, there has to be a content need that is being addressed, that either isn't already being addressed by another organization or isn't being utilized or addressed through your organization's overall outreach strategy. So I would say it has to be kind of a mission first endeavor. The right reasons for launching a podcast have to be there. Otherwise, you're not going to build an audience. So, and then of course, making sure everybody's on board who needs to be on board and aware of it. Your organization, from your marketing communications team to your social media team, your scientific and medical leadership, because the more awareness and buy-in you have internally, again, the better resources you will get for marketing and promotion and building that audience. And then once that audience is built, you can look at how to springboard off of that, potentially monetize it, and take it to the next level. We are still very much a kind of a skeleton operation. There's many resources I wish I had that we could devote to our podcast program. And hopefully we will be successful in the future with doing that soon, because I think it's an ever-changing field like publishing is. And the more expertise you could have on your staff and in terms of things like SEO and targeted advertising, just best practices for discoverability are really big. Those are areas that we're looking at. And if you have a content gap that you're not currently filling in this particular manner or isn't being addressed already in the field, then it's definitely something worth exploring. Yeah.
How did you identify that? So you're adding the fifth podcast. You grew from 1 to 4. Now you're adding a fifth. So how did you identify there was a gap there?
Yeah, market analysis, membership analysis, where we're asking our prospective members how they access content, and particularly with the younger early career investigators. And definitely podcasts and multimedia are a big part of that.
Well, Chris, how can people follow the work? How can they find your podcast? Where would you like to direct the audience to find out more about all these different things you're working on?
Yeah, you can either search American Diabetes Association or you could head to our journal site. We have a bunch of information there, diabetesjournals.org. Go to your preferred podcast platform, just search diabetes and one of them will pop up, and hit that like button and give us a 5-star review. And we'd very much appreciate it.
Spoken like a true podcaster. My guest has been Chris Kohler. He's the vice president and publisher at American Diabetes Association. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to share with the audience around what you're doing at the intersection of podcasts and healthcare.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.